The idea for this stream is to go through. There's a um, there's a proposal that I posted in the Forge. If I export something to YouTube, which I might, we'll see. I'll try and put the link in the description there. Right, so the idea is we are looking for a way to solve a few different problems. The biggest one is when you onboard somebody into Urbit, they show up in an empty landscape. And, it's sort of a desert landscape. There's nothing there. There's, if you know somebody's Pat P and the group name, then you can get into a group. If you know a Pat P, maybe you could find some apps or whatever. But even those are not terribly useful. Something like, Sphinx is a great tool for discovery, but it doesn't help if you're not pals with anybody, because then you're not, sort of on the gossip network. And so that means there's not a lot. It's very much just kind of you show up and then it's not that different, honestly, to how it looks if you buy a new computer and you set up the computer. The difference is there that people know what to do with the computer when they get on it. They're like, okay, I'll go, open a web browser, access stuff, install whatever programs they want, but they already know what they want to do with it, right? Which is not the case with Urbit. It was probably not the case with computers originally either, and I'm sure they had to solve this problem in their own way. And in a lot of ways, they had a harder version of it than we do. But we still have to solve this. And so one way to do that, one sort of direction to go down, is that basically you're getting invited to Urbit by somebody that you know or that you're connected to somehow, even if it's only parasocially through Twitter or whatever. Someone's telling you about Urbit and you're trying it out. And in this case, you really want it to be that whoever's inviting you not only gets you on Urbit, but gets you into whatever group they're running or a group that they're a part of, or they're recommending Urbit to you for some reason. And they should be able to invite you to everything that they think would be useful for you, so that as soon as you boot, you already have the stack of invites to useful stuff, and you're just you're off to the races. And this extends to everything, right? There should be groups, there should be apps that they think are useful. This should be you should be already pals if that's what they want out of that invite. But and then you're on the gossip network. Then you're on everything, right? There's this is something that you want arbitrary apps to be able to integrate into this mechanism. And so obviously this is a really wide open problem, and any solution to it is going to be pretty wide open, and I'm always scared about that kind of thing because there's a lot of ways for it to go wrong. There's a lot of ways for it to go wrong from an execution perspective. It can end up becoming very complex, it can end up becoming very fragile, and it can take a lot of development effort to make something like that reasonably smooth. So this is a proposal that tries to be as simple and incrementally buildable as possible, while also being super generic. And so, let's just start going through it a little bit. Right. Another phrase that we're using is the idea of closing the loop of, like you're using Urbit, you want to invite somebody else, then they're on Urbit, and then they're using Urbit in a way that's beneficial for them, and then they invite somebody else, right? That's the loop that, from a business perspective, from a growth perspective, virality perspective, obviously that has to be really smooth. But yes, even just as a user, it's very important to me, even if I don't care about virality, even if I don't care about everybody using Urbit, I want the person that I'm inviting to actually have a good experience and not just show up and have nothing to do. And so, so that's like another way to describe this goal. because this is so general a problem, it's important to try to look at a specific case and see if we can generalize from there. The simplest case of this is I want to be able to invite someone into an urbit group who might not already be on urbit. Relatedly, like I may not know that they're already on urbit, and I just want to be able to send them a link that says, "Hey, join my group," and they can click on it, and they should expect to get an invite to that group. Yeah, links I think are definitely the right way to do it. They're how this works everywhere else. Everything's built for it. You can communicate them anywhere you want. Yeah. So what this link needs to do behind the scenes is it needs to establish an association between the person who clicked the link and their PAT-P, right? Because once you have that, then if you communicate that back to my ship, I can send them an invite. And you want to make this work for everyone, right? You want this link to work, yeah, regardless of whether they have a ship. If you imagine the idea of taking some Telegram group and trying to move it onto Urbit, what that should look like is the last message in the Telegram group is, hey, here's the Urbit link. And there's a link, and anybody can click on it. Some of those people are already on Urbit, some of them are not. Doesn't matter. Everybody ends up in that group. So that suggests, yeah, links should work. Like you could have one-shot links for a single person, and you could have more generic links that can be semi-publicly or even publicly shared. So the destination of the link should ask the user if they have a PAT-P, and if so, to enter it. Otherwise, it should show them options for getting on Urbit. Signing up for hosting is a great option, of course. Running it locally, there's any number of ways that you might want to do it, but eventually that should hopefully terminate in, okay, we have a PAT-P and we can tell that back to the person who sent the invite. Once you have that, then you can just send them an invite. So what I'm proposing is that this happens through a generic invite service, or lure service, I'm calling it, right? Trying to avoid the name invite service because while we're looking at the example of an invite, but this is actually a pretty generic thing, and so if you use words that feel like they mean a lot, like invite, which do mean a lot, then they implicitly not only mean something positive of what it can do, but also what it can't do. And we don't want to set our mind on that track of this is only for inviting, no matter how broadly you think of the word invite. So, right, so the goal of the service is to notify the inviter the link was clicked, and what was the PAT-P of the person who clicked it. The inviter can then perform arbitrary actions. Right. The inviter might want to delegate the actions. So it might be that I'm inviting someone, but when they click the link, I actually want that to go to a different ship than myself. And so we call that role the configuration server. This might be useful in a few different cases, especially if the inviter is running on their laptop or something. They're not always online. Or if there's something really generic that you want to be able to just send the same link to a bunch of people. Where, in particular, if you have a bunch of different people who want to send the same link that does something relatively complicated, then you want to be able to delegate who actually gets the notification that the link was clicked. And then finally, that service, the lure service, could be hosted by the inviter, but not every ship has a publicly exposed DNS name, or even should have that. And so you potentially want to delegate that as well. It's also convenient to delegate that because that service may be operated by someone like Plon or another hosting provider or something like that, and they should and that allows them to add all the bells and whistles to it. They can modify it over time without having to push out some kind of OTA, which there's not even a meaningful OTA there, because basically you want to be able to choose which Lure service you want to use, and you don't want that to be just like in the base distribution or something. Because then you have to kind of agree on what precisely that service looks like and what it does, which instead you should just be able to choose it. So that's another one that we probably want to delegate to another ship. Okay, so with that as background, the spec I think still needs to be filled out a little more, but we just described these different roles. You have the inviter, the configuration server, the Lure service, and you have potentially a hosting provider. And yes, some of these might be the same. It's possible that these might be the same ship. It may not be all these entities might not be different, or it might not be separate. We'll need to agree on a URL structure. My guess is it should look something like this, where the service, right, so you have some host name, you have some category. Category is not really the right word, but you want some kind of subpath so that you can host several landing pages on the same service. You want to specify who's the ship that should get notified about this, and then there should be an opaque token that corresponds to that invite. That invite still might be a one-shot invite or a public or a semi-public invite, but it still needs a specific token. So it may or may not be secret. So the Lure service, which is the one that runs, that has the publicly available DNS, that will be at a specific URL, and there's some details that doesn't matter a lot what they actually are, but we should generally agree on them. Let's say basically how you can communicate, or what it needs to do, what it does when it learns of the PAT-P of the user. It should send this to the configuration server. You want this to integrate with hosting providers potentially, right? You want to be able to say when you link to a hosting provider, give it the config ship and the token, so that at the end of the sign-up flow, it can go back and send a post request to the Lure service with that information and the PAT-P of the new ship. That way, if you go to this landing page and you click sign up and you go through that whole flow, when your ship comes up and you go to it, you'll see the invite. And that should happen automatically. You shouldn't have to go back and click the link again and then type in your PAT-P or something. You should never have to type in your PAT-P in this flow. The configuration server, which often will be the inviter, but not always, should have. There's a few options here, and this is one of them that I think is the right one, but we'll see as we prototype whether that's correct. The idea is you have a Lure app, which has the default service that you're currently using. You can change that. So it might point to Klon's Lure service, or it might point to if someone else is running one. That's fine. It has a scribe path just to access that. So some way to modify that. It isn't listed here, but presumably there's some poke or something to modify that. It has a subscription path, which is what you should subscribe to if you want to know when a link gets clicked. So, for example, if we're trying to do group invites, then the Groups app should subscribe to bytes and say, okay, I generated this token, or generated this link which has this token, and I stored it in my state. And when I hear that come back from the subscription path of my own Lure, then I will do what I need to do. In this case, send an invite. And then, obviously it should respond to the following. To this poke which is generally going to come from the Lure service saying, that link was clicked. The idea, right, so what this suggests, there's a few alternatives here, right? This puts the responsibility for what to do when a token is invoked, when a link is clicked, on individual apps. So like groups would do it, but if pals wanted to integrate with it, then pals would also subscribe to bytes, and there wouldn't be any direct connection between, say, groups and pals, even though they're potentially should be both responding to the same click, because you want them, you want the new user to both get added to your groups and become your pal. And so what that does is it's very nice from a sort of division of code situation, but it doesn't give you a screen that's like, okay, here's your active invite links, and here's where we can configure, I want it to do this, 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 and this. Because you can build that for a specific app, but to build that for all the apps, it's unclear exactly how you do that, right? Especially if you want it to be generic so that some app that you don't know about can plug itself in and be on that list of things that it can do. And so I think that's actually the answer is you want there to be an app which is separate from Lure and separate from groups and separate from pals, which says every time that you pull in every time we hear that a link is clicked, we want to perform some set of actions. And then each app can sort of register itself with that app to say, hey, here's some actions that you can perform. This looks in a lot of ways like the service if this then that, where you have some kind of trigger, and then you have arbitrary different things you can do in response to it. The other version of this, of course, would be that you could actually, it wouldn't be particularly hard to write an app that does this, that listens for a trigger and then invites to particular groups and sends a pals request, invites to particular apps, something like that. The problem is then that's code, and you want users to be able to make these connections dynamically instead of them getting them over an OTA as here's the blessed set of invite templates or something that you can choose from. You want them to be able to actively, so sort of in the data of the app, say, okay, this is connected to this is connected to this is connected to this. And so that's what if this then that kind of is, as a concept. Now we don't have a version of if this then that on Urbit, and a really generic version, of course, would have triggers beyond just they clicked on an app. That there would also be triggers I received a chat message, or some notification went off, or a timer went off, something like that. And so I think that this generic version should be built. I have seen a prototype of this that I'm excited about, and hopefully becomes real before too long. If it does, then we can just hook that into this, and that will be probably where you'll want to configure what happens on invites, which will be great. Right, okay, so that's the spec for the Lure service, and it's worth going through some examples. For this, I will find the gist, because it renders the mermaid diagrams. If you haven't seen Mermaid before, it lets you draw diagrams like this, which is pretty intuitive, pretty easy. There's a online web editor that so that character by character you can see what it shows up like, and they end up like GitHub will let you, if it will treat it, if you do this, which is usually how you say like, oh, this is Python code, so use syntax highlighting for Python. If you do that with Mermaid, then GitHub will be like, okay, I'll syntax highlight your Mermaid, which means this, which I believe is technically syntax highlighting. Right. So this looks kind of complicated. That's probably the most worrisome part of it, but I'm not sure if there's a lot of ways to make it simpler, although that's worth trying to figure out. And so the idea is right. So in this case, we're just inviting someone to join a group. It's the example that we've been talking through. Turns out Alice is already on. So there's the inviter and there's Alice. Alice is the one that we're inviting. Turns out she's already on on-urbit. We don't know that yet. We don't know her pat P. We're just sending a link. Maybe we posted it in a group chat or something like that. So the flow is the inviter tells their own groups, generate an invite link. Groups asks Lure, okay, what's the default service that you're using? Lure responds. Groups generates the link and gives that to the inviter through the web front end, presumably. You should be able to do this through the command line as well, of course, but you need a web front end for this. The inviter then sends this link to Alice over however he knows her, right? Could be over Signal DM, could be a tweet, could be it could be physically over like there could be a QR code that is just put on a table somewhere and she sees it, right? And so she visits this URL, gets a landing page from the Lure service that says, "Hey, are you on Urbit? Here, then enter your pat P. Otherwise, here's how you get on Urbit." She is on Urbit, so she enters her pat P. Sends that to the Lure service. The Lure service then tells the inviter, their Lure app, "Hey, Alice clicked on your token." So Lure, the configuration server, which is running on the inviter ship, then tells the groups app, because the groups app is subscribed to the bytes path, "Hey, Alice clicked on it on this token." The groups app looks up in its state. Do I know anything about this token? It's like, oh yeah, I do. And anyone who clicks on this token is supposed to get invited to this group on some group host. And so I'm not 100% sure in groups too, but I believe that invites come from the group host and not from just someone who's in the group, because the group host has to somehow add them to a whitelist. I'm not 100% sure that's true, but if we stipulate that it is true, it could be true, then groups on the inviter is going to send that invite to the group's host saying, "Hey, please invite Alice to the group." And then the group's host is going to send an invitation to the group's app on Alice's ship, which in this case is already running. If it wasn't already running, then it would be, it would show up whenever it finished booting and so on. And so then the groups app, tells Alice, of course, "Hey, you've been invited to this." That shows up in the web front end. It shows up wherever she gets notifications. So this looks complicated. It's not. It has several entities involved. I'm not sure that it can be much simpler other than there's at the very least you have to have the inviter, you have to have the group host, and you have to have Alice. And so the question is, okay, yeah, the Lure service, we're adding one more entity. There's a couple of apps involved. I think this is defensible. I don't think it's too bad. And so there's a bunch of variations on this, right? Suppose that she's not on Urbit already, then that section of it, instead of entering her PAT-P, she signs up for hosting, goes to, Tlon.network or something, and gets a ship. The hosting provider recognizes that there was a token involved, and so goes ahead and pings the invite service. Actually, that might need the whole URL, because it needs to know what invite service was sent. That's probably true. And then the lure service, once it does hear what the ship is, sends that byte to lure on the config server or inviter in the example we went through, and the rest of it looks the same. Last example we have here is we try to do a more complicated one, where that link actually is going to invite them to 3 groups and invite them to install a couple of apps and also send them a pals request. And so this starts out the same. Somewhere you generate the link, and then you also need to somehow communicate that to, we'll say that Treaty lets you send app invites. That doesn't exist right now, but you can imagine receiving an invite to run an app. So somehow you need to tell Treaty, hey, for this same token, like sort of copy it in there or something, or manage it with an if this and that kind of interface. Say when that token is clicked, also invite them to pals, like to run pals, invite them to install Sphinx, and also in pals, when you see that token, send a pals request. So now we have this invite. The inviter sends it to Alice. Alice clicks it, goes through the hosting flow, or is already on Urbit or something like that, and the lure service now tells the inviter's lure, hey, that token was clicked. Lure now is going to fan that out to all its subscribers. So its subscribers are groups and Treaty and pals, and so it does one at a time. The one to groups triggers invites to the group host, like we showed before, for one group, but also another group and another group. The Treaty app hears about it, sends an invite directly to Alice, we'll say, for pals and for Sphinx, and the pals app hears about it and sends invites. Yeah, that's a typo. That should say just like pals request, basically, for myself. Let's just say pals request. I don't think it needs any more data because it's just for myself. Yeah. And that's it. You can imagine a bunch of other variations on this. Obviously, Lure could be running on a different ship. It could be acting as a separate configuration server. I don't have any example showing that, but it's pretty straightforward to think about. Yeah. One fun one to think about is just being able to say, okay, generate an invite link, and then it shows a bunch of checkboxes, and it's like, okay, out of all the groups that you're in, which ones do you want to invite them to, and which apps do you want to invite them to, and what other things? And so you just be like, okay, I just want to invite this person to everything that I'm in. And then you just it ends up duplicating your whole setup on them, and they end up with this very batteries included version. You could even curate, something like an Urbit distribution in the sense of like a Linux distribution, where it's just like, hey, here's a configuration that you should try out. Which there you start to see why I've been calling it a configuration server. I don't know if that's the right word. It's too generic, really. Come with something better. And yeah, you can send welcome DMs. You can do whatever you want, right? So from this point, there's a bunch of stuff that there's tons of ways to expand this idea. We talked about this. That landing page that comes from the lure service, the click service, there's all kinds of options there, right? You could embed a sign-up flow in there where you can actually just enter your credit card number right there. You could recognize certain tokens and offer subsidized hosting, right? You could have some deal with a group owner, like, well, your invites to this particular group, the group owner is going to pay for their hosting or for some period of time or something like that. Or the reverse, right? The person who sent that invite gets like a referral bonus for every sign up that happens through it. Lots of options. You could buy a planet directly on there. Especially if you can like log in with MetaMask, you could pay for it with ETH. You could get your planet, get sent directly to you, and you're in the group. All like this can be this is how you get on Urbit, like the main part of the funnel. If we can get that far. So, let's see, what else do I have here? It's easier to read in here, in my opinion. Okay, so, right. As I mentioned, anyone can run a lure service and landing page. You could have a landing, like if you're not happy with one, the ones that we run your own. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people doing this. You can even like create a specific landing page that's branded to match your own group, right? This is in the direction of Urbit. It's Urbit qua Urbit fading into the background. It's like you choose some hosting provider and say, okay, I'm gonna create a landing page that behind the scenes is Klon hosting, but nobody knows, nobody cares. All they see is my group branded according to my group, and I click this link and now they're in it, and obviously the lure service landing page should store the user's PAT-P in a cookie, because you might click on several of these links, and you don't have to be like typing your PAT-P over and over. Yeah, Malaman says white label lure service. Exactly. You should be able to do this. You should be able to do this completely, with as much or as little of the underlying, whoever's doing your hosting or whatever, like as much of that branding or as little as you want. Right. So, what else do I have here? Yeah, it might be useful at some point to be able to inject this token into the ship. There's not really a generic way of doing this, but a hosting provider could certainly do it, which would let the invites be automatically accepted. Because if you don't have that, the thing is that this invite service, this generates a connection between the person who clicked it and a PAT-P, but it does not guarantee that they're the only persons that, we don't have a signature from that ship. And so we can't trust these invites, that ship wanted to join these automatically, unless you're the hosting provider or something and you saw that part of the process. And so these invites just show up, but they have to be opt-in, which is good enough, and we should build it that way. But at some point, you probably want to, be able to automatically accept these. And for that, I think that it's sufficient to just inject the token into the ship and then have whoever's sending you the invite reference that token in what they're sending. I'm not sure. There's some stuff to walk through there, or to think through there. But extremely, extremely important for something like this is that there's so many different ways you can use this. So many ways you can expand the set of features, the scope, And the biggest execution risk is that we get bogged down in trying to support all of these use cases, or even if we don't implement them now, be like, oh, well, we want to future-proof against all of these. And you build something that's too general, too complicated, and we can't be doing that. All of this can be upgraded. We're good at upgrading things. We're just sprinkle a couple version numbers throughout, and we can make this better over time. So we should build something relatively small, relatively simple to start with, which I think is very doable here. So that's the entire spec. So Zod is running the lure service. Bus is wanting to invite Alice, who is Nick. But Bus doesn't know that Alice is Nick, and it's just like wants to be able to send her a link. So Bus runs this command, through an actual UI, of course, but it's scry out the default service, put on the we're going to act as a configuration ship here, so we put that in there, and we make a token, a random token. That creates a URL, and we will now, click on the link. The dot is, oh well, it's not going to make a difference because we don't actually read the URL, but it's fine. Okay, so it says enter your pat P. I'm Alice, my pat P is Nick, and so when I click this, we should expect to see that basically Zod's going to, because this is running on Zod, it should poke Bus with that information. Bus will slog that, and it'll also, since I haven't integrated with the groups, it'll just send a hi to Nick saying, "Hey, here's your token," which proves that the process works, and then everything else is, other than polishing this code, is make this landing page nicer, make the hosting integration work, and so on. Request invite, bam, there. So we can see on Nick, we got a hi from Bus saying, "Welcome, your token was this." On Bus, we had some verbosity on, and so we were able to see, we saw the token that was passed in, and so on. Great. Okay, that worked.